I've always been drawn to the wild, to the places where the world feels untouched, where the air smells of pine and earth, and the silence is so deep it hums in your bones. That's why I booked the cabin in the Adirondacks, a small wooden refuge nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering evergreens, far from the noise of my city life. I'd been craving solitude, a chance to reset after months of grinding through deadlines and dodging the chaos of crowded streets. The cabin was perfect, remote, rustic, with a single narrow trail snaking into the forest. I packed light, a backpack with water, a granola bar, a knife, and my trusty compass, a gift from my father before he passed. He'd taught me how to read it, how to trust the needle's quiet certainty to guide me home. I was confident, maybe too confident, as I set out that crisp October morning for a short hike, planning to be back by dusk. The forest welcomed me with open arms, its canopy filtering the sunlight into golden slivers, and for a while, I felt free, alive, invincible. The trail was clear at first, a well-trodden path of packed dirt and pine needles, but I wanted more than a tourist's stroll. I veered off into the thicker woods, following a deer path that wound through ferns and moss-covered rocks. My compass was in my hand, its brass casing warm from my grip, and I checked it every so often, noting the needle's steady point toward north. But as the hours passed, the forest grew denser, the light dimmer, and a strange unease settled in my chest. I glanced at the compass again, expecting to see the familiar alignment, but the needle spun lazily, jerking left then right then circling aimlessly. I tapped it, shook it, held it level. Nothing worked. My heart thudded. I was no novice. I'd hiked tougher terrain than this, navigated with nothing but stars and instinct. But the compass's betrayal felt personal, like the forest itself had turned against me. I tried to retrace my steps, but the deer path had vanished, swallowed by undergrowth. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches clawing at the fading sky. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was lost, alone, and the Adirondacks were no longer a sanctuary. They were a labyrinth. Night fell fast, a heavy curtain of darkness that muffled the world. I fumbled with my flashlight, its weak beam barely cutting through the black. My water was half gone, my granola bar eaten hours ago, and the cold was seeping into my bones. I told myself to stay calm, to find a clearing and wait for morning, but then I heard it. A murmur, faint and distant, like voices carried on the wind. My pulse quickened. A search party, maybe? Someone must have noticed I hadn't returned to the cabin. I strained to listen, catching fragments of words, low and guttural, too far to make out. Then, through the trees, I saw them, flickering lights, orange and unsteady, like torches or lanterns. Relief flooded me. I wasn't alone. I called out, my voice thin and trembling. But the wind swallowed it. The lights bobbed, moving away, and I stumbled after them, desperate for rescue, my boots crunching on twigs, my breath ragged in my throat. The voices grew louder as I closed the distance, but they weren't calling my name. They were laughing, cursing, their tones rough and edged with menace. My relief curdled into dread. These weren't park rangers or hikers. These were men, and they didn't sound friendly. I crouched behind a fallen log, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they'd hear it. The lights came from a clearing just ahead, where a makeshift camp sprawled across the forest floor. 3 men, maybe 4, moved around a fire, their silhouettes hulking against the flames. I saw rifles propped against a tree, a pile of what looked like pelts. Deer, maybe, or something larger. The air reeked of blood and smoke, and my stomach churned. Poachers. I'd heard stories about illegal hunters in the Adirondacks, men who killed out of season, who didn't care about permits or laws. But this was no campfire tale. This was real, and I'd stumbled into their world. One of them, a broad man with a scarred face, barked something I couldn't catch, and the others laughed, their voices coarse and mocking. I saw a glint of metal, a knife maybe, or worse. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. If they saw me, if they knew I was here, I wouldn't make it out of these woods. I forced myself to move, inching backward, my hands trembling as I gripped the log for balance. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my boots felt like a gunshot in the silence. I didn't dare use my flashlight. Its beam would betray me in an instant. The darkness was my only ally now, cloaking me as I crept away from the camp. The voices faded, but the fear didn't. I had no idea where I was. No map, no working compass, just the primal urge to survive. I moved blindly, navigating by touch, my hands brushing against rough bark and slick moss. The forest seemed alive, its shadows shifting, its whispers taunting. Once, I swore I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate. But when I froze, there was nothing, just the wind and my own ragged breathing. I told myself it was my imagination, that the poachers hadn't seen me, but the doubt gnawed at me. What if they had? What if they were tracking me? Their rifles loaded, their knives sharp. Hours bled into one another, and the night stretched on, endless and suffocating. My throat burned with thirst, my body ached from crouching and crawling. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I found a stream at some point, its water icy and tasting of minerals. I drank greedily, not caring if it was safe, and refilled my bottle. The cold revived me, sharpened my senses, but it couldn't erase the terror. I kept moving, always listening for those voices, those lights, but the forest was silent now, too silent, as if it were holding its breath. Dawn broke, gray and feeble, offering little warmth. I was exhausted, my clothes torn, my hands scratched and bleeding from thorns. I found a hollow beneath a massive oak and curled up there, too tired to go on, too scared to stay still for long. I didn't sleep, not really, just drifted in and out of a haze, haunted by the memory of those men, their laughter, their weapons. The second day was worse. Hunger clawed at my stomach, and the cold had settled deep into my bones. I moved slower, my body protesting every step, but I forced myself to keep going. I tried to orient myself by the sun, but the canopy was too thick, the light too diffuse. The forest felt different now, not just vast, but malevolent, as if it were conspiring with the poachers to keep me trapped. I heard them again that afternoon, or thought I did. Distant shouts, the crack of a branch, the low hum of a motor, maybe an ATV. I dropped to the ground, pressing myself into the dirt, my heart racing. I didn't know if they were looking for me or just hunting, but I couldn't take the chance. I stayed low, crawling through mud and leaves, my knife clutched in one hand, useless against their guns but better than nothing. The forest seemed to mock me, its paths twisting, its landmarks repeating. Was that the same gnarled tree I'd passed hours ago? The same boulder? Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I clung to one thought. I had to get out. I had to survive. Night came again, and with it, a bone-deep exhaustion I couldn't shake. I was dehydrated, my lips cracked, my vision blurring at the edges. I'd run out of water hours ago, and the stream was long behind me. I stumbled into a clearing, the stars visible through a gap in the trees, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. If I could see the stars, I could navigate. My father had taught me that too. Find Polaris? Follow it north? But the clouds rolled in, smothering the sky, and my hope withered. I sank to my knees, sobbing quietly, the weight of the past 2 days crushing me. That's when I saw it. A faint glow, not orange like the poacher's fire, but white, steady, like a flashlight. I froze, my breath catching. Another hiker? A ranger? I didn't call out this time. I'd learned my lesson. I crept toward the light, silent as a ghost, and saw a figure moving through the trees. Not one of the poachers. Too small, too cautious. I followed, keeping my distance, until the figure reached a dirt road. A road. Civilization. I broke into a run, tears streaming down my face, and stumbled onto the gravel, my legs giving out. The hiker was a woman, older, with a kind face and a backpack heavier than mine. She saw me, saw the state I was in, and didn't ask questions. She gave me water, a protein bar, and led me to her car, parked a mile down the road. I collapsed into the passenger seat, my body shaking, my mind still in the forest. She drove me to a ranger station, where I told my story in fragments, the words spilling out between sobs. The rangers were grim, their faces hard as they listened. They knew about the poachers, they said, had been tracking them for weeks. Another hiker had tipped them off, spotting the camp days before I'd stumbled into it. The poachers were arrested the next morning, their camp raided, their weapons and pelts seized. I was safe, they told me, but I didn't feel it. I still don't. The forest haunts me, its shadows lurking in my dreams, its whispers echoing in the quiet moments. I survived, but apart, I still wake up some nights, my heart hammering, the taste of damp earth and pine in my mouth, as if I'm back in those woods. It was supposed to be a carefree summer escape, a chance for me and my college friends to unplug and soak in the wild beauty of the Smoky Mountains. There were 6 of us: me, Sarah, Mike, Jenna, Ethan, and Claire. We'd been tight since freshman year, bonded over late-night study sessions and bad dorm coffee. Renting a lodge in the Smokies felt like the perfect way to celebrate our last summer before senior year. The lodge was a weathered cedar beauty, tucked deep in the forest, with creaky floors and a stone fireplace that smelled faintly of old smoke. We arrived in mid-July, the air thick with humidity and the drone of cicadas. The first few days were pure bliss, grilling burgers on the deck, swimming in a nearby creek, and laughing until our sides ached. But by day 4, we were restless for adventure. So we planned a group hike to a waterfall we'd found on a trail map. That's when everything went wrong. The memory of that day claws at me, sharp and unrelenting, and I'm still trying to piece together what happened in those woods. The trail started innocently enough. We set out at dawn, backpacks stuffed with water, granola bars, and sunscreen, our chatter echoing through the trees. The path was well trodden, packed with tourists snapping photos of the misty peaks. Mike, always the joker, kept us entertained with terrible impressions of our professors, while Claire sketched wildflowers in her notebook. About 2 miles in, the trail grew crowded, a bottleneck of hikers clogging the narrow path. Ethan, our unofficial leader, suggested a shortcut he'd spotted on the map, a faint line veering off through a denser part of the forest. "It'll cut our time in half," he said, his eyes bright with confidence. I hesitated, glancing at the thick underbrush, but Sarah nudged me, grinning. "Come on, live a little." So we ducked off the main trail, pushing through ferns and ducking under low branches. The forest swallowed us quickly, the sounds of other hikers fading, until it was just us, the crunch of our boots, and the occasional bird call. Then the fog rolled in. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone dropped a curtain, One moment, the trees were sharp and vivid. The next, we were wading through a gray haze so thick I could barely see Jenna's red backpack 5 feet ahead. We stopped, disoriented, our voices muffled in the damp air. That's when Mike tripped over a root, his ankle twisting with a sickening pop. He swore, collapsing onto the ground, his face pale. We gathered around him, but the fog made it impossible to see the trail markers. Panic crept into our voices as we realized we were lost. We argued about what to do next. Mike couldn't walk, and the fog showed no signs of lifting. Ethan wanted to push forward, insisting help couldn't be far. Claire, always practical, suggested we stay put and wait for the fog to clear. But the air was growing colder, and the forest felt wrong. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal fingers in the mist. I felt a prickle on my neck, like we were being watched. After a tense debate, we decided to split up. A decision that haunts me still. Ethan, Jenna, and Claire would go for help, while Sarah and I stayed with Mike. "We'll be back before you know it," Ethan promised, his voice steady, but his eyes uneasy. They vanished into the fog, their footsteps fading too quickly. Sarah, Mike, and I huddled under a tarp, trying to keep warm as the day bled into dusk. Mike was in pain, his ankle swollen, but he tried to keep things light, joking about how we'd tell this story at graduation. Sarah and I forced laughs, but the forest was too quiet. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive silence that pressed against my eardrums. Then, just as the last light faded, we heard it, a scream, raw and terrified, tearing through the fog from somewhere far off. It was Jenna's voice, unmistakable. My blood went cold. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Another scream followed, this one cut short and then nothing. We sat there, frozen, straining to hear more, but the forest was silent again, as if it had swallowed the sound whole. We didn't sleep that night. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent my heart racing. Mike clutched a pocket knife, his knuckles white, while Sarah whispered prayers under her breath. I kept replaying Jenna's scream in my head, trying to convince myself it was an animal, a trick of the wind. Anything but what it sounded like. The fog didn't lift, and the darkness was so complete I couldn't see my own hands. Around midnight, we heard footsteps, not the quick, purposeful steps of our friends returning, but slow, deliberate ones, circling our little camp. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. Sarah whimpered, and Mike hissed at her to be quiet. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment I thought we'd Amagi. The rangers found us around noon, their voices cutting through the haze like a lifeline. They were kind but grim, their faces tight with worry as they helped us back to the main trail. We told them about the screams, about our missing friends, and they promised to send a search party. They took us to a ranger station, gave us blankets and coffee, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd left something behind in those woods, something that wasn't done with us. The rangers asked questions, their radios crackling with updates, but there was no sign of Ethan, Jenna, or Claire. Sarah cried quietly, and Mike stared at the floor, his usual humor gone. I felt hollow, like part of me was still out there, trapped in the fog. Days passed, then weeks, with no word. The lodge, once our haven, felt like a prison. We stayed on, hoping for news, but the forest seemed to mock us, its shadows deeper each night. I started having nightmares. Jenna's scream, footsteps circling, and a figure just beyond the fog, its face hidden, but its presence heavy, like it knew me. I'd wake up gasping, the smell of pine clinging to my skin. The rangers kept searching, But the Smokies are vast, and hope was slipping away. Then, 3 weeks later, a miracle, or so we thought. Ethan, Jenna, and Claire were found alive, stumbling out of the woods miles from where we'd last seen them. They were gaunt, their clothes torn, their eyes haunted. But their story, it wasn't what we expected. They told the rangers they'd been chased, not by animals or some faceless monster, but by people, locals, they said, who didn't want tourists in their woods. Ethan described men with weathered faces and hunting rifles moving silently through the fog, their voices low and threatening. Jenna said they'd shouted at them to leave, calling the forest private land. Claire, usually so composed, broke down as she recounted hiding in a ravine for days, hearing footsteps and whispers at night. They'd survived on berries and stream water, too scared to move until hunger forced them out. The rangers were skeptical. There were no reports of hostile locals in the area, and the Smokies are a national park, not private property. But Ethan was adamant, describing details that chilled me. The way the men seemed to know the forest intimately, moving through the fog like ghosts. The way their eyes glinted in the dark, almost inhuman. Jenna swore one of them had whispered her name, though she couldn't explain how they'd known it. I wanted to believe them, to cling to a rational explanation. But something about their story felt off. Their eyes didn't meet ours when they spoke, and they flinched at sudden noises, like they were still being hunted. I kept thinking about the footsteps we'd heard, the scrape against the top. Were those locals too? Or something else? I've tried to move on, but the Smokies left a mark on me. We're back at college now, but our group is fractured. Mike's ankle healed, but he's quieter, his jokes replaced by long silences. Sarah avoids the outdoors, says she can't stand the smell of pine. Ethan, Jenna, and Claire stick together, but they're different, wary, secretive, like they share a truth they won't tell us. I've scoured forums and old news articles, looking for anything about hostile locals in the Smokies, but there's nothing. Just stories of missing hikers. Some found, some not. I keep thinking about the fog, how it felt alive, like it was hiding something. I've started to wonder if Ethan and the others were telling the whole truth. What if those locals weren't human at all? What if the forest itself didn't want us there? I know it sounds crazy, but I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled into something ancient, something that's been in those mountains far longer than any of us. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I'm back in that fog, hearing Jenna's scream, feeling those footsteps circling closer. And I wonder if whatever we met in those woods is still out there, waiting for the next group to take a shortcut.
I don't know how to begin this, but I need to get it out, to make sense of what happened to Emma and me in that godforsaken stretch of Oregon wilderness last summer. We'd been planning our trip to the remote Siskiyou National Park for months, a break from the grind of our city lives in Portland. Emma, with her wild red curls and that infectious laugh, had been the one to suggest it, flipping through a tattered guidebook she'd found at a thrift store. "Look at this, Jake," she'd said, her green eyes sparkling, pointing at a faded photo of a misty valley cradled by jagged peaks. "It's like stepping into another world." I couldn't resist her enthusiasm, so we packed our hiking boots, a couple of backpacks, and drove out to a rented cabin on the edge of the park. The air was crisp, scented with pine and earth, and for the first day, it felt like we'd found paradise. But paradise has a way of turning on you, and what we stumbled into out there wasn't just a wrong turn. It was something that clawed its way into my nightmares and hasn't let go since. We set out early that second morning, following a trail called the Whispering Ridge Loop, mapped out in the guidebook's curling pages. The trail promised a 6-hour hike through old-growth forest to a lookout over a canyon carved by some ancient river. Emma was all energy, snapping photos of ferns and mushrooms while I lugged the water and snacks, teasing her about her obsession with documenting every leaf. The trail was clear at first, marked by faded yellow blazes on tree trunks, and we followed them easily, chatting about nothing and everything, our jobs, our plans, the little apartment we'd just leased together. But about 3 hours in, something shifted. The blazes stopped appearing. I checked the guidebook, its creased map showing a neat loop, but the terrain didn't match. The path we were on narrowed, choked with roots and underbrush, and the landmarks, a forked pine, a boulder shaped like a sleeping bear, were nowhere to be seen. Emma frowned, turning the map sideways. "Maybe we missed a turn," she said, but her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. I suggested we backtrack, but the trail behind us looked different, like the forest had rearranged itself when we weren't looking. My stomach twisted, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to scare her. By late afternoon, the sun was sinking fast, painting the forest in shades of golden shadow. We were still walking, trying to find anything familiar, when we heard it, a rustling, sharp and deliberate, like footsteps crunching through leaves. Emma grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart thudding. We stood still, listening, but the sound didn't come again. I told myself it was a deer, maybe a bear, though the thought of a bear wasn't exactly comforting. Then Emma pointed at the ground, her face pale. There, in the soft dirt, were boot prints, fresh, deep, with a tread pattern that didn't match my hiking boots or her sneakers. They trailed off into the trees, parallel to our path. Someone had been here, close enough to leave prints, close enough to see us. My mouth went dry. "Could be another hiker," I said, but my voice sounded hollow, and Emma's wide eyes told me she didn't believe it either. We kept moving faster now, the guidebook forgotten in my pack, the forest closing in like it was alive and watching. Dusk hit hard, the light bleeding out of the sky, leaving us in a grey half-world where every shadow seemed to move. We were exhausted, our water nearly gone, and the temperature was dropping fast. I could see Emma shivering, her jacket too thin for the biting cold. We needed to stop, to rest, but the idea of sitting still with those boot prints in my mind made my skin crawl. Then we found it, an abandoned campsite, tucked in a small clearing. A torn tent sagged against a tree, its fabric shredded like something had clawed through it. A backpack lay open, spilling clothes, a cracked phone, and a half-eaten protein bar. A fire pit sat cold, surrounded by scattered pots and a single shoe, its laces tangled in the grass. Emma clutched my hand, her breath shallow. "Jake, this looks like someone ran," she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on us. I noticed something else, more boot prints, the same tread as before, circling the campsite. They didn't lead away. They just stopped, like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. We had no choice but to stay there for the night. The cold was brutal, and we couldn't keep wandering in the dark. I tried to build a fire, but the wood was damp, and my hands were shaking too much to get a spark. Emma huddled close, her teeth chattering, and we wrapped ourselves in a blanket from our pack, sitting back to back for warmth. The forest was silent now, unnaturally so, the kind of quiet that makes you strain to hear something, anything. But there was something else, a feeling, like eyes boring into us from the dark. I kept glancing at the trees, expecting to see a figure, a face, but there was nothing, just shadows. Emma whispered, "Do you think they're still out there?" I didn't know who they were, but I couldn't shake the image of those prints. I lied, told her we were fine, that we'd find the trail at first light, but I didn't sleep. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, made my heart lurch. Once, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of something pale between the trees, but when I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was my imagination, but my body didn't believe me. My pulse pounded in my ears all night. The worst came around 3 a.m. Emma was dozing, her head against my shoulder, when I heard it. A low rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on a tree. It was faint, but deliberate, coming from the direction of the ruined tent. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The tapping stopped, then started again, closer this time. I shook Emma awake, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to move, now." Her eyes were wide, terrified, but she nodded. We grabbed our packs and stumbled into the dark, not caring about the trail anymore, just moving away from that sound. The forest seemed to fight us, branches snagging our clothes, roots tripping us. I kept looking back, expecting to see someone, something, following, but there was only darkness. The tapping followed us, though, faint but persistent, like it was toying with us. I don't know how long we ran, but my lungs burned and Emma was sobbing quietly, her hand gripping mine so hard it hurt. When the tapping finally stopped, it was worse somehow, like whatever was out there had decided it didn't need to chase us anymore. Dawn broke slowly, grey light filtering through the trees. We were battered, freezing, and lost, but the sight of the sun gave us enough hope to keep going. By some miracle, we stumbled onto a gravel service road just as the sky turned pink. I don't know how we found it, but I've never been so relieved to see tyre tracks in my life. We followed it, half running, half staggering, until we reached a ranger station. The ranger, a grizzled man named Harris, took one look at us and called for blankets and coffee. We told him everything: the missing trail, the boot prints, the campsite, the tapping. His face changed as we spoke, his jaw tightening. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant. "You're lucky you made it out," he said. He told us about a fugitive, a man named Caleb Morrow, who'd been hiding in the park for months. Morrow was a drifter, wanted for assault, known for stalking hikers, watching them from the shadows. "He doesn't always hurt people," Harris said, his voice low. "Sometimes he just plays with them." They'd found traces of him before, campsites like the one we saw, abandoned in a hurry, but never the man himself. The rangers had been searching for him for weeks, but the park was too vast, too wild. Emma and I drove home that day, silent for most of the trip. We haven't talked about it since, not really. She threw out the guidebook, and I can't look at maps without feeling sick. Sometimes, at night, I hear that tapping in my dreams, and I wake up convinced I'm back in that forest, with those unseen eyes on me. I don't know if it was Morrow out there, or something else, something the rangers don't talk about, but I know what I felt, what we both felt, the weight of being hunted, the certainty that we weren't alone. I keep thinking about that campsite, the shoe in the grass, the prints that didn't lead anywhere, and I wonder if whoever was out there is still watching, waiting for someone else to lose their way.